Hello, everybody. I just wanted to, before we get cracking onto any kind of conversation, just acknowledge and pay our respects to the ancestors and descendants of the lands upon which we meet today, the Bundjalung people, and pay my respect to elders past, present and future. And I'll hand it over to Nkechi. No, I won't? Okay, well, okay, I'm Lucie and this is Nkechi, and together we run a website called The Pin, which is all about race, culture and identity within the Australian narrative.
Cool. And we're obviously very close friends. I'm going to introduce the people sitting on the couch today with us. Ziggy Ramo is a Perth-based hip-hop artist who released his debut EP, Black Thoughts, in 2017 to much acclaim. His hard-hitting music follows the lead of acts like Remy and AB Original to bring issues of racial abuse and Indigenous injustice to the forefront. And he's going to be playing on the Mix Up stage tomorrow at 12:15. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Ebony Boadu is a Sydney DJ who co-founded Ism magazine with longtime friend Yemi Soul. Ebony also is a co-founder of Girls, which is a Sydney club night giving female DJs a platform, and is a host of FBI radio program Back to Back.
Yeah,
hey.
hello.
And she will also be on the Mix Up stage tomorrow playing at 1 and 2:15. Michael Hing is a radio presenter, writer, television presenter and comedian. He's the host of a 3-part series on SBS called Where Are You Really From? And he's performed sellout crowds in Melbourne and Sydney comedy festivals, amongst others. Welcome as well.
That line I wrote in my bio is only because you cut off the joke. The joke is that I perform sellout shows in Melbourne and Sydney, as well as 2 very disappointing seasons in Adelaide, and that's important because if you don't say that, it just sounds like I'm telling you I did well, which I hate about myself. Anyway, such a good start. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you for already spilling your guts.
So good.
We're trying to lift you up, not bring you down, man. So why are we here? We're here to explore the idea of a third culture kid, what it is, what it means to us today in Australia, and we're also going to have time for questions at the end in the last 15 minutes.
I thought I would kick it off with the topic of third culture kids. So just get you guys to give us a bit of an idea of what it means to you. I'll start with Michael.
I think it's like about when you grow up in a place like Australia and you're not part of the dominant culture, but you have to live in that dominant culture. You have influences from maybe your familial culture, like your family and stuff, but they don't necessarily match up with what your friends do. And there's that constant code switching, right? Where at home you've got to be one way, at school you've got to be another way. And I feel like it's talking about getting caught in the middle. That's what it means for me, just getting caught in that middle. It's not very funny, sorry. Something about taking off shoes, I don't know. What do you want?
And what about you, Ebony?
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess, like, to be completely honest, I hadn't heard of the term third culture kid until you guys brought it up 2 minutes ago to me backstage. But I guess, like, what I took from it being biracial is, having one parent who is from Africa and then growing up with a mum who's from Australia and then going to school and not being white but not being black and having to sort of navigate that whole thing. So I guess that to me is what that's all about.
And Ziggy?
Yeah, so I guess for me, a little bit different. I had like a mum and a dad who were educators and super nerdy and told us that we should feel important to speak and stuff, which is really cool. But my dad was working with the academic theory called the third space. And what that essentially is talking, and I'm Indigenous, so for the third space in that theory, it talks about having to operate in a new area. And like, if we ever want to move forward as a country, we're going to have to do it in a third space, because when non-Indigenous Australia created Australia, Indigenous Australians have been forced to understand the new dominant culture, whereas non-Indigenous Australians haven't had that same education of Indigenous culture. So if we ever truly want to be Australia, we have to do that in a third space. So for me, I always grew up thinking like, man, Dad, like it must be so, like I'll never understand what you went through as like an Indigenous Australian who was born before 1967, so he wasn't classed as a human, he was classed as flora and fauna. But he always used to say to us like, I'm never going to know what it's like for you guys who have to grow up operating in a third space where your Aboriginality will be questioned. You know, like it's always like, oh, so you're 50%. Yes, it's just my arms. Yeah, like it's, which is really interesting because so far for us, we were really lucky because our dad and mum were always super like you're a whole person. So like your third space is combining 100% of all of your cultures and creating a third space to move forward in that regard.
Ebony, did you ever experience that when it came to formulating your identity of having to be confronted by the idea that people didn't think that you were necessarily a whole person or a part of a culture 100%?
Oh, absolutely. I don't know if anyone's from Sydney, but I grew up in a little suburb called Penrith.
Woo!
Which, do you know where that is?
Yeah, man. That was where the
So-
first Krispy Kreme donuts place was in Sydney.
Yeah. So Penrith is extremely white. I went to a very white school. This is going to sound a little bit like stupid now that I've really thought about it, but my hair is naturally really curly. I usually wear it natural, I do. I just thought it looked better with my look, my DJ look. But growing up, I used to straighten my hair so much because I just wanted to fit in that it started going permanently straight. Like I started losing my curls and I'd go to school and, or like I'd walk around with my dad. I remember walking around with my dad and people like questioning if I was adopted, and then being with my mum and people just like not really understanding what being mixed race was, I suppose. Like when you go overseas, like people are a lot more aware of it in England or like the United States, but here it's sort of like, I think something that a lot of people aren't completely aware of yet.
People always thought, my mum is non-Indigenous, she always thought that, people always thought that she was our babysitter. Like in the shopping
like
centres.
having to deal with stuff like that all the time. But then also I remember being like 13 and I finally started hanging out with black people and thought it was the sickest thing ever. And they thought I was interesting though because I was like lighter. And so to them I was white, but then I'd go back to school and to everyone else I was black. And it was like this weird thing of like, hang on, like where do I fit in then? Like this is weird and annoying and I don't get it. And I remember going to Ghana and thinking this is going to be sick, like I'm finally, like this is who I am, this is going to be amazing. And everyone I'd walk around and everyone would call me Ebony, which means white. I was so upset. Oh my God, I was so upset. That was the worst thing ever. That was the worst. So yeah, I completely understand like not completely feeling like you're one or the other and just being in this weird space of like, yeah.
Where do you find your identity though within that? Does it make you resilient and does it make it easier to be kind of grounded in your identity? Because I guess, in a sense, people thinking that having the freedom to be a part of multiple cultures also allows you to create your own self-identity. Do you think that's...
Yeah, I guess I've sort of had to. Another like funny little thing, I guess, about me is that half of my siblings are white and the other half are fully black. So I like go out with my siblings and people won't believe that we're related. So I think even in that, even in my own family, I sort of had to formulate like, okay, well, where do I fit in here? Like, and I have a mixed race brother and he's like the only other mixed race person in my family. But through that, it's just like, cool. So we're not fully African, we're not fully Australian, but we're biracial and that's cool too. And like, there's a place in society for us as well. Like, do you know what I mean? Like you sort of just have to go with it. I don't resent it or anything. Like it's just sort of, it is what it is, I guess. Do you know what I mean?
No, I think I definitely understand exactly. I have a very similar, I've got two little brothers who are 20 years younger than me that both parents are Nigerian, and then I also have my stepbrother and stepsister who are white, and my brother we're the rainbow family. That's basically how I explain it.
Yeah, I can relate to that, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to get Michael's perspective on this as well, because your family's been here for quite a few generations, from what I've learned through your documentary.
Yeah. Oh, so my family came to Australia over 100 years ago, but in that time they've only sort of married other Chinese people, which does imply that my ancestors are quite racist and only married other Chinese people. Or it could suggest that they were sort of marginalised by our society in a way that means they were unable to integrate fully. I mean, who knows? Who knows? How could we possibly ever tell if only there was a record? Unfortunately, they were all burned. But for me, it's quite. I mean, it's such a minimal thing compared to your guys' story. But like for me, I guess like mixed race element or like the not fitting in element is more like, because my family's been in Australia for so long but looks Chinese, but we don't do any Chinese stuff. I am constantly a disappointment to like every Chinese person I meet. Like if I ever go to Chinatown, I mean even a Chinese restaurant, the waiters and the wait staff will often like speak to me in Mandarin, and I'll be like, oh nah dude, I'm sorry, I don't, and then they'll just look at me so disappointed, and I'll be like, oh. And like, I've had to go to China for work a couple of times, and that's just a nightmare, because people expect you to even, like, they just think you're a moron, and it's not, and I am, but it's not in the, like, if I'd grown up there, I reckon I could speak Chinese. I back myself in the ability to learn the language I would have learned as a kid, but as it stands, oh, it's a nightmare. Anyway, what was the point of my thing? I don't remember. I hate myself. Yes. No, yeah.
Sweet, great.
So good to be.
I think that is is a thing that a lot of people, especially if language, I think language is a very strong part of identity, and
So
I think
do you speak?
no, I don't
language?
speak Igbo. So Lucie
Right.
and I, neither of us are able to speak our parents'
Yeah.
language. Well, we can speak English, so we've got half
Yeah.
of the language down. But
What about you guys?
yeah,
Are
can
you
either of
bilingual
you?
at all? No.
Kind of, but I feel like a massive imposter.
Yeah.
And my parents' first job out of teachers' college was in East Arnhem Land, and when they got off the plane, a lady there called Nidapo Shirley, she always said she was going to have 5 kids, and she'd only ever had 4. And when she saw Dad, she said her son had come home. So, and my father's parents were removed from. Removed is such a nice word, which is funny. We always use nice words to talk about genocide. But yeah, we didn't have connection to our Indigenous culture. But then when they went to East Arnhem Land, they were adopted, for less of a better word. I kind of think of like absorbed, or just kind of like fit, like reconnected. So then when us kids were born, we were born into the Yolngu kinship. So I grew up the first kind of 6 years of my life, I grew up in East Arnhem Land, and so I always, like Momo, what I call, is like my grandmother. I always just assumed that was like my dad's mother. But like, because my dad's family were brought up in like the missionary, and like were super indoctrinated into like the Seventh-day Adventist church. And when my dad was like 15, he was like, I don't want to be a part of this because this church is telling me I can't have access to my culture. So he kind of like ran away, fell in love with my mum, who became like the white devil to his family because he wasn't a part of the church. So they basically ran away to East Arnhem and then like were absorbed into that culture, and we were born into it. So like for me, I always thought like, oh yeah, like this is where my indigeneity is, but like it isn't my ancestral country. So like I grew up speaking Djambarapuyngu and Yungamata, and like as I've grown up, it's been such like an interesting thing, because it's like I have such a strong connection to indigeneity, and I am so strongly connected to Yolngu culture. But at the same time, it feels so in 2012, my parents went back, they were like principal in like Wick community, like in Cape York. And when Dad went there, people actually identified him, who he was, and we found out that that is actually where our ancestral country, because when his grandmother was stolen, she was stolen off country. So we'd never known until 2012. And so then when that happened, it was like, my whole world just like, was like, whoa, like, the language which I'm so privileged to speak like isn't my ancestral language, and that's so like confusing. And so then it's like with the rise of like Baker Boy, which has been amazing, we like grew up basically together in like a similar community, and people are always like to me like, oh, why don't you rap in language? And it's like I almost feel guilty that I can speak it, because it's like there's so many Indigenous people who haven't been privied to any language or culture.
Are you worried people will accuse you of like cultural appropriation
No.
or something? Or
No, I'm not, because like...
Because it is your family culture, right?
No,
like
no,
it's your
and don't get me wrong, like the Yolngu people are like the most... They are my family. And like, it's not that it's not. But when like, as an Indigenous person, your connection to country is everything. So to like grow up having a connection to a country that isn't the blood that flows within you is just such a like weird place to operate, but also such a privileged place to operate, because the fact that they were so giving with their culture allowed me to have like this amazing connection that I would not have had. And then you obviously see like a lot of Indigenous Australians growing up completely disconnected, and like I think the trauma that brings along is like a whole different thing. And that's the thing, like being like a third space kid is like, there's no like perfect space to operate. And there's so many things that go up and down with it. But yeah.
That comment that you made just then about cultural appropriation, I'm interested to get both of your thoughts on that as well, because I think this is something that third culture kids can sometimes struggle with, this idea that you're appropriating a culture that maybe you kind of come from it, you kind of don't, you're trying to fit into it. What are your thoughts?
I struggle with... There's so many layers to it. I think cultural appropriation is kind of having a moment right now where we, as a broader Australian culture, are working out how we feel about it, right? It was only like 5 years ago that wearing Native American headdresses at a festival was seen as pretty normal, right? And now we've kind of come to a point now where we kind of recognise that's pretty crook, and we're sort of trying to work out, you know, better things, less offensive things to put on our heads. Although I will say, I saw a white man last night, and it's important that he was white, wearing a conical hat at Lord, like a rice paddy hat, and I yelled at him, "Nice hat," and I yelled it quite aggressively, which was probably not okay. And then he's turned around and said, "Thanks, man," and walked off. Like he didn't realise that, and I'm like, well, whatever.
Or maybe he thought you were approving. And
Yeah, no, I think he
passed.
was like, yeah, man, it is a nice hat. And I was like, oh no. I've actually encouraged him. He's gonna be like, no, it's cool. That Chinese comedian told me it was okay. Anyway, yeah, no, I don't feel that guilty appropriating from like Chinese stuff, because I think we're not at a nuanced level yet where I can get dragged for that on Twitter. Maybe in 10 years, I'll get accused of it, and then it'll be crook. But right now, I feel pretty confident. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever felt like I've appropriated my own culture.
Yeah.
Like, I don't really, is that what you mean? Like,
I think it's as well like, and I guess it's kind of leaning a bit on tokenism, but that I think I'm only going to talk from my experience, but at times I felt that maybe that I've been approached because of the fact that I am biracial, that I might be a bit more palatable for a broader crowd, and I'm not seeing it as too much different.
Sorry, quickly butt in and just say how funny it is that like people of colour or anyone who is not white is mixed race, whereas like white people who are like Italian and French, they're not biracial. And it's like, it's so interesting because it's like, if you're like a white Australian and you're like, yeah, like my French and then Italian and German, no one's ever like, okay, what percent of French are you though? Like, I need to know, like,
Give me that breakdown.
I need the breakdown. Like, has it been tested? Like, whereas like, as soon as you like don't look white, whatever, like people like cling to know what it is.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, it's sorry, that was floating in my head, and I think that's just so funny.
Yeah.
It's just like, and again, what you were saying, which is so interesting, is like talking about how like Australia is kind of trying to figure out where we sit on all of it. Again, what are like the voices that kind of lead that conversation? It's like white people. who like, and I just think it's like, when we're like trying to create this third space, it's so important that the voices that are helping people understand that are people from that area.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my little.
I guess, I think you've made really good points. I think pretty much all of us have probably had to deal with somebody saying, what is your mix, or what are you made of? And it's pretty fucking frustrating.
People always want to ask me where I'm from.
Yeah.
And I'm like, 50,000 years is where I'm from. Where are you from?
I often say my mum's vagina. I don't know where you came from. So, that kind of shuts down the conversation pretty quick.
What are you made of is the worst one.
Yeah.
It's so, like, what are you made of? I don't know. Yeah, like 70%
Why are you black?
Water.
Why are you black? Just spit it out. But to go back, do you ever feel that, have you ever been in a situation, or do you feel that sometimes you have been approached because of your palatability, whether that be that you're lighter skinned or that you don't sound like a foreigner? Has that ever happened, or have you ever experienced something like that?
Absolutely. I used to do TV commercials, and the briefs would always be like, light skin with curly hair, and you'd literally go into a room with girls like us, and it was weird. Like, it was so weird. And it's not like, it's like, on one hand, it's like, oh, amazing, like the Australian media is putting people of colour on TV, but then on the other hand, it's like, oh, but like not people past a certain shade, like, do you know what I mean? Which is pretty warped and like
That's
annoying.
crook, yeah.
Yeah, and it's definitely a thing. I did a commercial with my best friend.
What was the brand?
I'm not going to say
Say
what
the
the brand
brand.
was.
Well-
I'm not going to say what the brand was, but I got hassled into doing this thing with my best friend. And my best friend and I always get confused as being sisters. She's half Nigerian and I'm half Ghanaian. So, I don't know, we have big curly hair, like we have similar skin tone, but we actually don't look anything alike. Like if you really look at us, we don't. Like, I'm really short, she's really tall. Like, we just actually, physically, we just don't actually look that alike. Anyway, we got asked to do this stupid campaign. If anyone's seen it, you're going to know what it is.
From Microsoft?
It was for a clothing brand, and basically they wanted us, they made us go and get our hair braided, box braided, and then they braided us together, like our hair physically together, so we looked like conjoined twins. And at first we were sort of like, okay, the braids, like, that's cool, like they want us to look similar, like, I'm like, I need this paycheck, so I'm gonna go along with it. And then we get there and they start braiding our hair together, and we're like, yo, this is a little bit weird. And then we shot the photos, and the photos came out and were on huge, like, billboards everywhere. And I was so pissed off, and like, we are never doing this shit again. Like, this is crazy. I can't believe we agreed to this and let them braid us together and didn't say anything.
Wow.
Yeah, that was really, really bad. So absolutely, I've been,
Ziggy, what's been your experience?
Well, I was going to say, I think you said something so interesting in terms of like past a certain shade. And I think like we as Australia have like this real easy ability to have like historical amnesia. And it's really dangerous because when you don't like have an understanding of your country's history, it allows the same things to just continually repeat themselves, like cycle, cycle, cycle. So like the idea of like being in an acceptable colour like actually stems from like 1905 legislation. So like in WA there was the 1905 Aboriginal Act, and A.O. Neville, he was named like the chief officer of all Indigenous people under the age of 16. So he legally had the rights to tell them if they could live with their parents, what school they could go to, like any form of self-determination was ripped away from them. And they would also, like the criteria of like if they would be removed from their families would come from, they had 16 cards of different colours from like white to black. And they would go and hold the colours next to the kids. And if you were under a certain shade, you were considered worth saving because they had a 3-generational step plan to breed out Aboriginality because Aboriginal was labelled as a dying culture. So like it's so scary to me, the fact that that isn't common knowledge, because that then same mentality is applied to this present day, like looking at people of colour who are palatable, because then we're doing a good thing, like the intent is okay, but like just because the intention is pure, you like actually are perpetrating further and further systemic damage. And we're at this time where like it's so deeply rooted in our history and culture that if we don't go back from like the very beginning to understand where that mentality stems from, we're never going to wake up from that social amnesia. But it happens all the time. Like people, like we want to basically give ourselves alley-oops. So like choosing like people who are palatable to talk at events, or like people who are happy to be, and that's the other damaging thing. Like as like a third culture kid, like you come from like this weird position where you have sometimes been given certain privileges that kids who from your more oppressed culture haven't been given. So you grow up in this really interesting dichotomy of like, you don't know if you should be like just thankful or like, or feel guilty. Like it's such a like, it's such a like, you're just on eggshells all the time. So like, when I was 15, I like basically told my parents I'm gonna go to Sydney because like I just wanna like I wanna experience as much as I can. And I went to a boarding school that I got an academic scholarship for. And the whole time I was there, I just felt like I just had to do more and more and more and more because I was like the poster child for Aboriginality there.
You become representative of everyone.
Totally. Yeah. And like
it's there's a term for it, the rep sweats. Like they talk about it. And like, I mean, there's obviously, again, I'm so privileged and do not have the same story as you guys, but like the version, my like piss weak version of that is being rude at restaurants. Because you know how Chinese people are sort of known as being just fucking terrible customers? Do you know what I mean? Like there's a stereotype out there. So when I go to restaurants, I'm like so polite now because I don't want to, because I feel like I'm representing. And I'm like I'm a vegan, but I've eaten like ham sandwiches because I don't want to send them back because I'm like, no, I know that's a stereotype. And because I hear people over here, they like these fucking, like they call them like you know, fobs, or you know, they always whinging, and that anyway. So sorry, not oppressed at all in any real way, but that was my very piss weak version of that. Or driving's another one, right? I feel so obliged to be. I'm such a good driver. I'm so good. I went and did the Bathurst defensive driving course when I was like 18 because I was like I'm gonna be the best driver because I'm worried that if I fucking, you know what I mean? Yeah, exactly the same, right? With the academic stuff, yeah. I should be allowed to be a shitty driver, but I can't. You should be allowed to be a dumb shit. You should.
No, it's like it's so funny because like both of my parents are like
I'm sorry.
teachers, and they always just play such like they always said to us like, as long as like your comments are you tried your hardest, we don't care. But from a young age you learn like, if it's so funny, the stereotype of like people of color and Indigenous people are lazy, and it's like you have to work twice as hard to then have someone say that's really good for an Aboriginal person. It's like, cool, yes, thank you so much for that. That sits great with me.
Growing up as well in Australian culture, which is dominantly white, did you ever go through a period in kind of finding your identity? And I think it's you're kind of alluding to this as this is good as an Aboriginal, where the goal is to be white, almost like white passable. And then when did that point happen where you just thought, no, fuck this, that's not right?
For me, and not to get it super dark, but like, gonna do it. I basically was hospitalised in 2016 because I've like, as an Indigenous Australian, there's this thing called like cross-generational trauma when like, there's been a bunch of studies done like, when traumas happens to people, it can be passed on when those circumstances don't change or they intensify. So like there's really strong mental health that just like issues that run through my family. And from like, since I can remember, depression, I've always had it, and suicidal ideation. Like I always just thought that was normal, that like I would walk around and be like, oh, if I crossed the road, got hit, that'd be great. Like, and that just like intensified and intensified. And then I was like I'm on approved leave at the moment from deferred studies, but I was studying medicine because wanted to try and advocate for improvement of Indigenous health. And it just got so intense, and it got to a point where basically my counsellor was like, if you don't go to hospital, I think you're going to kill yourself. And so for me, when I was in hospital, it just got to me, and I was like, the way that I'm living my life for others and trying to make others feel comfortable, it's not sustainable for myself. And like, I feel so privileged because I've had an amazing education. I can talk really white, if that is helpful for people to feel good about themselves. But it like got to a point where it was toxic for myself. And I don't think like, the reason why I'm so open with like my mental health struggles and what it has happened for me is because I don't think we talk about like the reality of that trauma enough, because it's such like a conceptual thing to think about like cross-generational trauma happening. But like the reality of it is that like an Indigenous Australian who was raised by an Indigenous father who is in the 2% that have a university degree, had a mother who with a two-parent home. I had a brother, 2 sisters, so loving. We had our shit, but it was like the most perfect situation to be raised. I ended up in hospital because I was going to kill myself. Like, that's just the reality of it. Like, the trauma is just, like, it was unlivable for me. And that's like, I speak of that because I just think it's important that, like, we understand that it's not like this far off conceptual thing. Like, it's real. And yeah, so for me, to bring it full circle, the point where I realized was it wasn't sustainable. And I wanted to, like, live my life for me as well. And it's actually like, it was the best thing that ever happened to me as well, because it got me to a point where I started to understand that, like, walking around with like this anger and this hatred, I used to think I could never show it because showing it would make people defensive and they would like revert into themselves. And you learn from a young age, like when you're trying to help people and talk to people about those things, if you're too aggressive or this, they shut off instantly. So I used to think you'd have to suppress anger, but I understood that anger isn't necessarily yelling and being loud. Anger is like being motivated to do something. And so for me, it actually was like this big awakening because it let me like reconnect with everything I was truly feeling. And then for me, it got me to a point where I was like, you know what, I love myself. I'm great. And I love people. Like, I'm a super compassionate person, super empathetic. And the reason why I care about creating a safe space, like a safe third space, is because I love humans and everyone. And I think that like, getting to that place is really hard, but it's really worth it. And the only way to do that is to be yourself.
Yeah, it's a really great and interesting point. And thank you so much for also sharing that. I know that sharing stories of mental health is, I personally think it's needed in this day and age because of the shame that surrounds it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, like, as a man of colour, like, statistically, I'm, like, super susceptible to killing myself. And I think the fact that we don't talk about it, it only like heightens like the taboo and the stigma around it. But I think it's so important for anyone out there, if you're ever going through anything, put words to it, because like it's so normal to have like those feelings, like any feelings of self-doubt, no matter on the scale. But like the tangent aside, I just think it's important that we break down like the smoke and mirrors of it and just talk about like the reality of what human existence is.
Ebony, I want to throw the question to you, but with a different look. I guess talking from the perspective of being a woman of colour, I think in media and in mainstream media, the way that women, black women specifically, and African women are portrayed has a really interesting take, to say the least. How did you form your identity, and who were the main people in your life that, if you had any, that helped with your identity and the formulation of that? And you were talking before about the need to kind of have to be white in having straight hair, for example.
Okay, let me just quickly have a little think. So I guess, growing up, I had a white mum and white sisters. And so the women I were around had straight hair and were white. And I went to a white school, and all the boys liked all the girls with blonde hair and blue eyes, and I was like, hated my hair. And then I guess, I don't know, who did I look up to? I still looked up to my mom. Like, I mean, she's incredibly strong. She would always tell me, like, you know, like, own who you are, like, just, like, embrace what you have and who you are. I forgot the question a little bit. I'm sort of trailing
I think the question we're asking is, for the most part, I think a lot of us have dealt with trying to be white because that's seen as the optimum to be throughout, I guess, our childhood. And then I feel that for all of us, there has been a turning point. And to draw back, I guess, to our experience, the reason why we started the pin was through our friendship. And for me personally, I found that having a best friend who also like went through similar experiences and who loved aspects of herself that I wasn't sure about in myself kind of gave me the strength to be a bit more, to be myself and to not be ashamed of it. And I was just wondering, did you have a support network similar to that, or did you reach a point where you're like, fuck it, I am who I am, just went from there?
Okay, can I be completely honest? I'm just going to be completely honest. I think the reason that I started to embrace how I looked, if I'm being so honest, is because I started hanging out with black guys and they were like, hey, your hair's sick. You're actually cool. Like, this is actually cool. Do you know? I'm just being honest. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would always had white guys who were like, oh, like, not into it. And then black guys were suddenly like, actually, that's pretty hot. So that's probably how I started to embrace it, if I'm being honest. But I do have a best friend who is biracial as well, and we just, like, as soon as I met her, we just clicked. We were both studying at the same uni. She was doing creative writing, I was doing journalism, and we ended up starting a magazine together. I guess, like, that's sort of how it all started as well. We both, like, we just got each other. We both had a very similar upbringing. We both look very similar. We both went through the same things, and I guess through that, she would have probably been a big part of like how I became super comfortable with just being me.
I relate to that so much because, like, growing up, being a Chinese kid, no one is interested in you romantically at all. No one. Like, there's no one. When you're like a 14-year-old Chinese kid, the white girls aren't like, oh, he's sick. Like, that's not. But you get to 25, and you've been to uni. And suddenly all the Chinese shit's coming home to roost. Do you know what I mean? People assume you're good at math. People assume you've got your shit together. And it's exactly the same. I was like, I'll embrace being a Chinese nerd. Like, I'll embrace all that cultural stuff in my past because suddenly girls are into it. Yeah, totally. It's like he can hold down a job. He can he's like polite on the phone. All that. I'm taking it all. But like when you're 15, it's like, oh, you're a dork and a nerd. Nah, man. I don't know. I have a share portfolio. I don't care anymore. You know what I mean? It's sick. I totally get it. And that's like, it's
okay,
totally,
good.
it's a motivator.
It's
a total motivator.
Yeah, it's probably not the right answer, but
No, I think
it's like once people start finding it attractive, like it's so basic, but it's like, yeah, man, that's it. That's all it took. Was girls being like, yeah, that's cool. I'm like, yeah, no, it is.
I think that is actually a valid point, because I think like a lot of people I felt when I was growing up kept saying to me like, just wait till you're out of high school, or just wait till you get to university with like people who have a more global perspective than where you grew up. So I totally understand that.
Yeah, I grew up in a country town in Victoria. Went to a school with 300 kids, I think, 300 or 500. Me, my sister, and my brother were the only black kids at the school, basically. There was one other Asian family. We kind of like hung out a little bit, but we're in different grades. But I had that exact experience where I moved to Melbourne and I was like, I'm so ugly. Like, I don't have straight hair. I'm not white. And then I went out and I was like, I'm hot. Like, I got this. It's okay.
Okay, good. I'm glad you can relate. I'm glad.
I think a question that we've kind of touched on briefly as well is the where are you really from question. And I guess I wanted to direct this towards you, Michael, because not the where are you really from question, but...
Michael, I need to know. It's been bugging me this whole panel.
I've done the 23andMe quiz, you guys. Don't worry.
You've based a whole series around this and hosted a series. You went to Bendigo, you were talking to lots of people in the Chinese community there, talking to Sikhs in New South Wales and asking them about that question as well. But you filmed that series over 2 years, and I'm wondering if at any point over that 2 years you feel like the conversation changed.
Oh, that's interesting. It changed. Yes, it did and it didn't. In that Australia is moving at such different paces. So when we started it, I had heard some comedians kind of do jokes about it, and it was kind of a thing I'd talk to my friends about how people of colour always get that question. It's kind of frustrating. But then when we finished, when it actually went to air, which was a couple of months ago now, when we first put I thought, all right, we've moved on. It's 2018. Maybe this won't hit as hard because everyone's had these conversations. But then as soon as we put the promos up, it was like literally tens of thousands of people were like in the comments being like, this is exactly what we're talking about. I always get this question. This is so frustrating. And I was really surprised about how much the conversation hadn't changed. I'd really thought that we had actually, as a country, kind of moved on from asking that very simple question of like, hey, where are you from? Oh, I'm from Illawong. No, but, where are you really from? I thought we'd moved on from that, but yeah, we hadn't. And I think it's because I live in a progressive bubble in Sydney, and outside of, the inner west or whatever, it's really different, yeah.
And for both of you, how much are you answering this question? Do you feel like it's changed?
Probably not that much, no. But I think at the same time when people hear how I sound, it's probably not how they might expect. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, where are you from? Sydney. Oh, okay. Like sometimes they can just let it slide after they hear that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But yeah, I definitely still get asked that all the time.
Do people ever try and guess?
Oh yeah.
All the
you
time.
Guys?
All the time.
What kind of guesses do they get? Because me, it's basically Chinese. Basically, sometimes
I
Korean.
think we could almost play like pick my race bingo kind of. I think Mauritian would be like in the top, Brazilian.
All the Spanish,
yeah.
Indian, Islander, everywhere, anywhere in the world I could be from.
Why do you think people do that?
But it comes from people. It comes from multiple communities. I think the difference between the wider Australian communities, they ask, "Oh, are you this?" Whereas Africans, from my personal experience, tell me I'm from their country. So they're like, "You're from Libya." It's like, no. Or you're Egyptian. It's like, I'm sorry, I've let you down. I'm not. You're wrong. But have you had similar? What's something? Oh, actually, Lucie's had probably the best one.
A very specific one. Some people came to a house party of mine. It was a very big party. Actually, Nkechi and I lived together. And they were trying to describe me because they hadn't actually talked to me really, I don't think, at the party, and they were trying to figure out who I was. And they were like, it was that Japanese Fijian girl. It was so specific. And I was like, I kind of see it. I kind of get it.
I don't. Still don't understand why those two in particular. Yeah. Have you ever had something that's really just like thrown you, been like, are you kidding me?
I think you just get it so much all the time that you become pretty desensitized to it.
Blends in, yeah.
It's just noise.
Yeah, I've had everywhere, literally every continent, everywhere. It's just like, you're not going to get it. Like, let me just tell you, please.
But I think one of the most confusing things is that, like, when, like, people of your own, like, cultures. So I'm my heritage is Solomon Islander, Australian Indigenous, and then my mum's white Australian with like Scottish and some Portuguese thrown in there. And so like the first time I went to the Solomon Islands in 2011, everyone was like, Fiji, 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 Fiji. And I was like, man, like even where I'm from, like it's just like, it's pretty hectic. Like, because you just really like, and I think that's the whole term of like third space, because trying to create a safe space somewhere, because like everywhere you go, you just like are this thing that kind of sticks out.
I think the safe space is literally the 4 by 10 meters of this stage, like where you can chat.
I know, I'm like looking out and I'm like, are people understanding this? Or they're like, but I thought he was this.
I think that's an interesting point, the safe space, and also being at a festival. Both Lucie and I have experienced being at a festival in Tasmania, and the two of us we were dancing in one corner of the festival while while Sampa the Great was playing. And I think after about 5 minutes, we looked around, and every person of colour that was at the festival, which was maybe about 50 of them, had slowly moved to this one corner, and we became like the black section of a crowd. But I think the thing of safe spaces is true. I think for the most part, a lot of us have felt that we cannot have these discussions out in the open, and also in our creative works, which a lot of artists are turning to reflecting on their cultural heritage or the idiosyncrasies of their culture in the work that they're producing. How have you... do you think that the audience perception or their ability to absorb what you're putting out there has changed from... or when you create these works, do you think about that when you're putting your artistry together?
I can only speak from a comedy perspective, which is probably not a great place to start, because I feel like your guys' art is probably, or creativity is probably more earnest. Because comedy is always laid in irony and like subversion of expectation and stuff and sarcasm, the way you deal with race is often in the worst way possible to make the opposite point of the thing you're saying. So, if that makes sense. Yeah. So, like, you know, I think we were talking about wanting to be white. I've actually felt the opposite pressure. Often when people send out castings for comedy characters, they want them to be, like, more Chinese, because that's, like, funny, right? Like, I was put up for a movie called Mr. Wong Goes to Hong Kong, right? And it was about a Chinese guy from Australia who went to Hong Kong and felt out of place, which is like a reasonable story so far. But his solution to that was to like basically yellow face and do the buck teeth and miso soli, right? Like, which is just so crook. It's just the worst, right? And like, so it's kind of the opposite thing of like, often white audiences want you to be the stereotype of the Chinaman or whatever, so that you can like match what they want you to be in a funny way. Yeah. So, if anything, that makes me then want to be more white when I do comedy, so that they don't see that. But then in order to make that point, I have to show them what they wanted originally, so then I refer to the Chinese shit in order, you know what I mean? In order to subvert it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's like you just have to get that little part out of the way, so then you can
exactly.
actually do
You've got to acknowledge it. You've got to be like, all right, I'm Chinese, now we can talk about something else. You know what I mean? Like as an example, when I first started doing comedy, and people would, I had an opening sort of bit where the MC would often introduce me as being from the Sutherland Shire, right? Because I was doing comedy in Sydney local scenes. They'd be like, oh, this next comedian's from the Shire. And then people immediately have in their mind an idea of like what a person from the Shire looks like, right? They have a surfboard, they love crystal meth, they are, you know, because that's where I grew up, right? And then I would come up on stage looking like this, and I would be like, oh, I think when the MC said I was from the Shire, maybe I'm not the person you're expecting. And the audience was like, he's acknowledged the fact that he's Chinese. And then as soon as I did that, then I could talk about whatever, like mostly genitals, which is my passion, really. You know, so I feel like my perspective on this is so convoluted, I don't know why I bothered to answer it, because I feel like your earnest artistry is probably much more intelligent on this. So I cede the microphone.
It's like, it's pretty hard for it not to be like conscious in your mind. I think like you just learn to navigate your whole life through it. But for me, I think my personal favourite is, and even Splendour's done it, is having a world stage. Like, yes, it's the most funny thing to me, because it's like, oh, so are there multiple planets creating music? Like, is that like, is that why we have a world stage? Like, are we not all humans creating music? And I think it's just so interesting. And the other thing that I love is like, I am like a huge fan of like Swedish pop writers, and like Max Martin, he did all like the like late 80s, early 90s, like Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, Britney Spears, and just like the technical songwriting that is like amazing. And I always like, as a musician, when I like literally my first release that I kind of put out it was like, it's called like the Black Thoughts EP, and it's really just talking about my experience as an Indigenous Australian. And I felt like the first thing I ever wanted to put out, like you're saying, was to address where I stood on that thing so everyone knew where it was. And then like I think back about that, and it's like, you know, there's been times where there's like, I just like I love to write pop songs because I think it's super fun. But I think what's so funny is like, for me as an Indigenous person, whatever song I make or put out is Indigenous music because my life and my lens is Indigenous. So if I write a song that's talking about like our history and like the genocide that's happened, that's an Indigenous song. If I write a pop song about like wanting to go to the movies with someone, like that's also an Indigenous song.
Is that a point of frustration? I think for both of you, what I've noticed that you've acknowledged is that you have to put out the race. You have to put out this like, yes, I am blah, 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 before you can actually just be yourselves. Do you find that pressure?
It's also an incredible privilege, though, because
Yeah.
you are able to talk about things from a perspective that a lot of people haven't thought of before and haven't experienced. So you can say things and actually like share a lot of your cool stories with the audience. But I'm interested, when you were talking, Jen, about like writing a song that's always an Indigenous song, that's not just through your lens, though. That's ultimately a marketing thing as well, right? Because people look at it and they go, oh, well, this is an Indigenous artist, therefore his songs are about, you know, whatever. It's the same thing with me. It's like, even if I do a show, I've done like shows that are explicitly about race and ones that have nothing to do with race. And even the ones where it's literally a story about a breakup or whatever, all of the reviews are like, Chinese-Australian comedian Michael Hing delves deep into the Chinese-Australian experience of heartbreak. It's like, nah, everyone's been sad because they got dumped. Like, that's, you know.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I used to have an online magazine with my best friend, and we're both mixed race. And, like, coming back to that, we would talk about like a lot of different topics, but the whole, like, it would always come back to us being mixed race or being pulled to do things because of our background, and like that was super frustrating for us. And like even when we spoke on race, we did it we deliberately pick super varying views. So we'd pick, so for example, we did a video on Australia Day, and we went to an Indigenous Invasion Day march, and we spoke to the elders and like talked to them about what does Invasion Day mean. And then we went to Cronulla and we spoke to people celebrating Australia Day in Cronulla.
Did you interview Michael there?
Yeah.
I know, I didn't see you
I had
there.
my flag cape on.
I didn't see you there.
I grew here. You all flew. Just the word. Sorry. No.
But that was a video that we did, and I guess because of our background, it was automatically like, okay, cool, so you have a very leftist view and you guys are in support of this view and we're going to interview because of that. But we were sort of like, well, yeah, hang on. Like, we got pulled for all these interviews, but we were like, well, actually, we want to interview someone from the KKK and talk about that perspective. Like, we wanted to pick people with like crazy different, like, and like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Diverse?
Just like
Polarized?
very black and polarizing views. Do you know what I mean? We wanted to pick someone who thought this was really, really bad, and then someone who thought the opposite thing of that was really, really bad. But we just sort of got skewed as like, oh, they're mixed race, so they always have this perspective, and they must think this is the way to do it. And this, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which was it did get frustrating because, like, especially like when you study journalism, you're supposed to be impartial. Like, obviously, it's very hard to be, but that's what we were trying to do. We were just generally trying to be like, well, here's someone's perspective and here's someone else's. Like, make up your own mind and see what you think about it. But it was always like, well, that must be what they think, which, yeah, got super annoying.
Have you ever had it from, I guess, like your support networks, whether that be management or whatever, them put your race as a part of a ploy to get you into something?
Yeah.
And how have you responded to that? Has it been something you've been aware of, or?
Yeah, well, I work at SBS, so I feel like being Chinese hasn't hurt that. I try not to go for stuff where it's just any Chinese person could do it. You know, I just want someone who looks a bit Asian will get Hing. Like, you know, Ronnie Cheg's not available, fine. We'll get, you know. I try not to go for that stuff. I try to do stuff that's probably, yeah, more specific to me. I mean, recently I did a Stan show. I did Okine's show for Stan, and that was about the character I went for was a Chinese Australian comedian who worked in radio. And so, like, when it's that, like for that, I'll go for it because it's like, well, he's written that about me. I think I don't know, but yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's ads and stuff. You get pushed to do these things where it's like, well, Canton's doing a noodle thing, and they want you to be cooking with a happy family, and it's like, you've never seen a Chinese family cook. They're not happy about it. What are you, insane? You know, and
I think
when it's not true, you don't want to do it. Yeah.
My thing would probably be the same to do with like commercials or like music videos. And the annoying thing is it'll be something like, oh, we want a hip hop DJ, which is what I am, but I know it's because of how I look that I'm getting like asked to. Do you know what I mean? That's annoying. Like, yeah, I am a hip hop DJ, but it's annoying. That's super annoying.
What about stuff like NAIDOC Week? Like, are you a bit wary around the perimeters of NAIDOC Week of people approaching you directly just for that?
Yeah, I'm like a big believer of like, give me a platform and I'll use it. I'm pretty happy to just do things. And like this NAIDOC Week actually, we were asked like by Triple J Unearthed to create a song like with 3 Indigenous artists, and then I knew we were also going to be getting interviewed. So like for me, it's always like, if the pretext is that I can have my voice heard around those things, where I can like have the nuance to talk about that thing. So I got on Triple J Live and was like, oh yeah, so you guys are making the NAIDOC song? And I was like, yeah, the goal is to make a song that'll outlive it. Because like, we're artists who make dope music 365, 24/7, like not just in a week. Which is like...
We turned it on for this 1 week.
Yes, yeah. It's so... You get like... Man, I'm telling you, just clear that week because you're going to be busy. That's your like yearly earnings happening right there as a struggling musician. That's where you're going to make all your money. But no, like for me, it's like, I think it's like, I think it's just like coming down to like, you have to, like it's your own autonomy. You have to decide like what you feel comfortable with, uncomfortable with. But it happens all the time. Yeah, it's an interesting experience, and I think as I got older and kind of more sure in myself, like I felt pretty good to like exploit it for a positive way. Like one of my favorite Indigenous poets talks about, because when you essentially are trying to like commit genocide, the first thing you do is remove language, because there's so much attached to language, and especially in oral cultures, when you remove language, you're also removing knowledge and identity. And so what he talks about is like using his oppressor's tool against him. So like carving out his own space with English, like with poetry. And so for me, like I always think it's so fun because like there's like a big joke that like white people don't really have culture, but like one thing they love and is sacred to them is pop music. So I've just studied pop music so that I can write pop songs and put like secret messages in them. So they like get stuck in their head and they're singing like, I'm a racist, I'm a bigot. Like, I think that's so funny.
I also think in terms of the kind of, I guess we're talking about like selling ourselves out as well to an extent. Certainly that's, I think I'm in a really privileged position in that I don't have any responsibilities or financial, where I haven't had to make the choice, you know? And I think it's so easy for me, especially when I was younger, to judge comedians who do hack shit about like their parents having an accent and like just like real gross jokes about being Chinese or whatever. I used to judge them and be really angry about it. But now I'm like, man, if I had a mortgage or whatever, would I take 10 grand to make fun of my mum? Maybe. Like, I don't know, maybe I would. Like, I've just never had to make that choice, you know? And so you were talking about, like, you clear your schedule for that week because you're going to get all that money. It's like, well, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking now, like, what's the most Chinese, like, hack shit I would do for money? And, like, if you wanted me to dress in a fucking, you know, in a rice paddy hat for Chinese New Year, what's my price on that, you know? Would it be like $500? That's depressingly low. Like, you know, I don't know, maybe 20 grand? I don't know. I just, I've never been faced with that to make that choice. I don't know, you know?
Yeah, and I totally I'm pretty like strong with what I will and what I don't do. And I've been really lucky because like my manager, I've known him since I was like 15, and like anyone that I work with, like my booking agency, anyone, like my publicist, I pretty much like sit down and verbally vomit at them for like a good hour and a half. And for my manager, it was 8 years before we ever like officially worked, because for me, it's really important to know that, like, so I never know if I'm like extroverted or introverted, and I don't know if that's because of like the circumstances of where we're talking about like a safe space, because like I find people and understanding people really easy, but I find it really taxing. So like as I've gotten older, sometimes I just won't go outside because like it's just so draining. So when I like choose to work with people, I like kind of need to know that like I'm not going to be presented with something where I have to be like, oh, I thought so much better of you, you know? Because and that's the thing. Like growing up, this is like you can become like pretty good surface level friends with someone, and then suddenly race comes up, and you're like, oh, this friendship's over. But like your mum was really lovely and she made great food, but I'm never gonna see her again because we're not gonna be able to be friends after we try and have this conversation, and you're probably not gonna budge. And like you could like. Racism or bigotry can just like, it's like a secret agent. It just like hides, and then it can come out of people out of nowhere, and you're just like totally caught. So like when I work with people, I think for me, like my defense mechanism and my coping mechanism was just to be really clear with who I was. So in a hope that it will just attract people who have an understanding of that. So like, yeah, I just think if I'm transparent, then everyone kind of knows where I stand, and I hope that like means navigating through it becomes a little bit easier.
Do you find yourself, Ebony, putting up those kind of borders as well and having to be really direct about what you want to get out of the situation?
Yeah, I was just thinking like along the lines of the manager. I went to the UK recently and someone wanted to manage me, and then I got back and he was like, okay, cool, so you go by Ebony Boadu. We're going to drop the Boadu because it's too hard. You live in Australia. People are white. They can't say that. And the whole reason I made like my DJ name my full name was because I grew up and I had to constantly deal with people being like, how do you say your name? And I was like, well, now you have to learn to say it. Like, do you know what I mean? And that, so...
Yes, my name's Nkechi and it starts with an N. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, so I guess mine was like the opposite of like, yeah, having to be like, well, I actually want to embrace my culture and not just push it out of the way, actually. So he's not managing me anymore. Didn't work out.
Sounds like a good idea, actually. I've also noticed that you're also an ASOS insider. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is and how that's helped you, I guess, shape your brand or the image that you project?
Yeah, so ASOS is like a UK clothing brand, and they have probably about 30 people all over the world that are sort of like brand ambassadors, I guess. And so they send me a bunch of clothes, or I have like a limit of how much money I can spend each month, and I just buy clothes and post photos, basically. Yeah, it's like a very sick job. And I guess it's helped me shape. Yeah, it's not. It's helped me shape. How does it help me shape my brand? Well, I guess. ASOS is like I think ASOS is a cool brand to be associated with because they're very much about diversity in the sense that like they don't have like a male section, like a standard male section. They'll have makeup, like you go in the men's section and they have makeup, or they'll have jewelry that's like traditionally feminine, or recently they were covered in Teen Vogue for being like the only brand in New York Fashion Week to have like a plus size model. So I guess, yeah, it was a cool brand to be associated with in that sense, that they are doing a lot of cool things in regards to like diversity and being accepting, and I guess that's what I want my brand to sort of represent as well. You know what I mean?
And in terms of social media for all of you, Ebony, you use it quite a lot. Michael, I noticed you use Twitter a lot. How do you kind of, I guess, navigate questions coming from that space? Like, are you getting negative questions from people, or even, I guess, objectifying stuff happening in that space?
So much sexual stuff. It's crazy. Like, it's weird. Like, there was, like, this weird point where, like, I felt myself no longer being viewed as a person on Instagram, and, like, more as, like, an idea.
Can I just ask what sort of sexual stuff?
Like-
I thought you were joking.
No, like it's weird. Like, so I have a partner, girlfriend, shout out Vanessa. Hey. But like we like, this is gonna sound so funny, but we're super private, as I announce you to everyone. Yeah, we're like super private, introverted people, and we just like, I don't think we really feel like this big need to like project our love on a platform for other people. So like my Instagram is pretty much just for work, but like people just like, it's weird. Like it's really weird. And I think again, like when I was talking about like the historical amnesia, like men of color in Australia have been like used in some pretty interesting ways. So like in the Northern Territory intervention, when that legislation passed in 2008, basically the way the government justified that was because there were pedophile rings and extreme rates of domestic violence and sexual abuse. And it's not that those things can't occur, it's just that they're not significantly an Indigenous problem, they're a human being problem. And like the rates of sexual abuse and domestic violence were actually higher in Canberra than they were in the Northern Territory, which is interesting because the only difference like is that the population percentage of Indigenous people is the highest in the Northern Territory, and also the intervention then stripped away a lot of rights around land rights, so mining was then a lot more easier, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the reason I bring that up is because Indigenous men were used for the narrative that we are pedophiles or we abuse our wives or bad parents, and then if you go back even further, you know, you've had like the traditional warrior and like has to do this, has to do that, and like we've occupied like a very weird space.
It's a very big trope, I think, for particularly black men, that they're seen as either like the beast or the warrior. Like they're very strong and hyper masculine.
Yeah, and I try and like, I'm like super sensitive and feminine, and I really try and like showcase that with my like nails and earrings and stuff, because I just think it's like dope. I think like sexuality and masculinity and femininity should be really fluid, and I've been really lucky to be brought up with an understanding of that. But it is really weird because like I get like a bit like, I don't know, it's just so weird, like the like overt sexual things that happen on like in my Instagram comments and stuff.
I feel like we already asked this, but is it like people sliding into your DMs, or is it like just weird comments, or is it everything? Obviously, I get heaps of it too. Don't worry. Yeah. But I just want to know if your one matches what I get.
Ever since after uni, right? How's that share portfolio?
I comment heaps. Just people, oh, you look good, and, you know, yeah.
But I guess like it's really like that joke. Yeah. As much as I love it, it's also really interesting, right? Because like I think we think in our society like men are like thought, and that's why like when like the term like boys will be boys and stuff, like Stella Donnelly, amazing. She like had this amazing speech on stage where she was like, boys will be boys. That term is damaging for all genders, because like it's also pushing the notion that boys want to act in that behavior. Like I remember growing up and like men, like it's manly to just want to lose your virginity at 10. Like, I don't, like, you should just be ready to have sex whenever, with whoever. And I think that's, like, really damaging, because it's, like, we're portraying and, like, learning this, like, just toxic sense of masculinity. And the reason why, like, I bring up that thing is because, like, I very rarely kind of, like, talk about, I guess, like, the sexual nature in which my Instagram operates, because, like, I don't want to, like, divert the conversation from, like, I'm not trying to sit on stage and be like, it's hard for men. Like, it's also hard for men. And that is not at all what I'm trying to do. But I think just trying to, like, frame an understanding that, like, it's, like, this... The narrative of, like, men wanting any sexual advance, like, it's like, yeah, it's a bit like...
So I guess a form of, like, intense, in your case, objectification.
Yeah, and I've, like, had... Like, in my past, I've had some, like, pretty... hectic stuff go on, like, and I've always, like, it was this relationship that I'd been in before, like, I had to, like, navigate a way out of it so that it didn't come across that I was the one who was abusing. because like if it got flipped, like it's just like it's really interesting. I think we're in a time where like there's so much that like we need to uncover and understand. But yeah, it's like I don't want any of that attention. Like I'm basically happily done for my life. Like so it's really interesting.
That's very sweet.
Yeah. But it's just weird because it's like if you don't want to like post it everywhere, then it's just assumed that like you're all about it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sorry, just to bring the conversation back, and I guess also talking about objectification, and I guess also exotification to a certain extent. Ebony, you work in a very male-dominated industry. How has it been a female DJ and dealing with stuff like that?
So I hate the term female, like not to say anything.
I was just pointing out that you're female in a male, but like it's pretty obvious that you're female.
Constantly being like, oh, you're a girl that can DJ. Like when I first started, I had to deal with, when I wanted to learn to DJ, I would ask like guys I knew all the time, can you please teach me to DJ? Can you please teach me to DJ? Everyone just thinks it's a joke. Like I get everyone wants to be a DJ and no one takes you seriously, but people just didn't take me seriously to the degree that it was like, cool, I'm going to teach myself. And then when I taught myself and was getting booked, I'd have guys that I'd known for years come up and be like, no, you should have done it like this, and like literally take over my sets for me. Like crazy.
How do you push back against that? Because you've
have to be
created a lot of...
Like, no, it's cool. Like, I've got it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and, just keep, like, I just had to sort of keep going. Like, it was just annoying. I've had guys in clubs be like, oh, cool, so, like, where else do you play? And it's like, where do you play? Oh, house parties, cool. But you're going to stand and, like, I've had guys be like, I'm just going to stand here and make sure you're actually DJing. Like, what do you think I've put on a tape or something? Like, this is so insulting. Like, I've just had to deal with so much, like, stuff like that where I'll talk to my guy friends and be like, has anyone ever, like, said that to you? Or has anyone ever stood over you? Or has anyone ever, questioned, like, your abilities in any way? And it's like, no, they haven't. And I think, like, back to the objectification thing, like, yeah, I work for ASOS, but on my, like, personal Instagram, like, I obviously push all my DJ stuff. And I think, like, in the music industry, especially for like black women, like the image of them is often very sexualized. Like, we're supposed to be bad bitches, and like even like a lot of female DJs, period, like will be scantily dressed and like out here in like tiny little tops and like I guess I just because of the way that I already have to deal with the way that men don't take me seriously. In a way, I've sort of pushed back and I dress, like I always wear pants and I'm always in like baggy tees and like vintage tees and like I dress very sort of boyish. And that again goes back to not being objectified and not being like, oh, she's so exotic and like she's this hot girl DJ. It's like, no, do you know what I mean? Like I don't want to be hassled in my DMs. And I don't want to be like not taken seriously as a DJ, and it's just it's super annoying that that's even a thing that you have to think about. You know what I mean? But it's definitely something I've had to think about.
I know you joked before, but with social media, and I guess as well working for SBS and with like the video of like SBS is racist towards white people.
Yeah.
Did you cop anything from your like comedy or being able to take the piss out of?
Yeah, I don't know if you know this. People can be very mean on the internet about anything. They'll say your voice is weird, or your haircut, or you. And then they'll make some point. They'll be like, "Oh, your haircut's weird," and I'll always reply to them, "Yeah, but what about the jokes? Like, what did you think about the jokes? I don't care about my hair. What do you think about the jokes?" It can get pretty hairy.
Your haircut.
Yes, thank you. Content warning. This is kind of a hairy story, so I'm sorry in advance. You get really hectic stuff. So I, not working at the current show, but working at a show previously about video games. People play a lot of video games that, myself included, are just they are disgusting individuals. They're the worst. And I did a video about Minecraft once, obviously very controversial topic, and the top YouTube comment on it was, "Hingers should kill himself," right?
just brutal. But it's like, obviously, it's quite nice they use my nickname. Because obviously, if you're telling someone to neck themselves, keep it casual, obviously. And I, in a way to try and take control of that, it was pretty full on, but as a comedian, you try and make a joke about it, I printed off the comment and on an A4 sheet and stuck it on my cubicle at work, because I thought it was like, they want me to kill myself. I won't. Yeah. I know, this is the crazy person, I'm sorry. Obviously, though, because I was working just at the ABC, like, it's just an office, and not everyone's a fucking mental comedian. So, like, there's just sort of accountants walking by, seeing that, and just regular people. And so one day my boss came up to him and was like, Michael, come on, mate, you can't have a suicide note on your cubicle. You gotta take it down. And then, and to be clear, I don't want to badmouth them because they were trying quite hard. We had to then have a big meeting because everyone's got to be safe. It was me and my boss and my boss's boss and a counsellor had to get drawn into this big room. And the counsellor was like, well, she had the piece of paper. She's like, this person wants you to kill yourself. Do you want to kill yourself? And I was like, no, I'm fine. You know, I know it's a really serious thing, but for me, it was just an internet joke. And she's like, this doesn't make you feel bad. And I'm like, no. And she goes, right, what about these? And she had like a folder, like a dossier of emails I hadn't even seen, of people being like, fuck this guy, I hate him, I hate his voice, he's dumb about games, how did he get this job? And she's like reading this through, and the whole time, like, where did you go to counselling school? How is this possibly okay? And like the elaborate things people say. One guy said he wished he invented a time machine so he could put me in it and send me back to Auschwitz so I could check myself in and gas myself, which is so full on, but also just like, if you invent a time machine and that's what you're going to use it for, you're bad. You're a bad guy. That's my one take. No, it's like
that's the takeaway from all of this. If you invent a time machine,
even if you're going to commit to going back to World War II, probably kill Hitler. I reckon that might be a better use than getting me a D grade internet personality to go to, and also the language you use, check myself in. Like, I'd turn up there and be like, hello, I believe you've got a room booked for me at this concentration. Anyway, so yes, the internet can be quite mean. But mostly on Twitter, I just block. I don't look at notifications, and I tweet about my ass and my balls and whatnot, and then I don't check responses. Anyway, sorry.
Great. I think a natural segue from here would be to open up to questions.
If you had a time machine.
Yeah.
If you had a time machine.
You can either kill baby Hitler.
Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Or not? Nope.
Okay. Sweet. I have a question. Thank you. I have a question. Sorry, I didn't get your name. Me? No.
Ziggy?
Yeah. I have a question about cultural appropriation. As someone who's a guest on this land and wants to, pays much respect to the traditional owners, whether that be learning the language, learning the rituals. I guess, what advice would you have for someone who's not Indigenous Australian to navigate that in a way that's respectful?
Yeah, big question, hey? But we're having so much fun. So I think it's like, the first thing is like, indigeneity is not homogenous in Australia. So like 270 plus nations, there was over 700 dialects being spoken. So currently I'm sitting off country. So like I'm not Bunjalung. So like anything I speak about, like I guess I have as much right as any of you to speak about at the moment because I am off country. But obviously being brought up Indigenous, I have like a lens that I can share with you. And like, for me, it's what I always do is just trying to connect with people who are of country. So like trying to connect with community members who are the traditional custodians. And it's like, I could never speak on their behalf of like how they would want you to best engage. And the other thing is like, Indigenous Australians are all individual people and have all different ideas, and like, I think we sometimes feel like this pressure and expectation to all be united and have the same opinion, but like as people we're all going to have different ideas. So like I know some Indigenous people who really want languages to be taught in schools and others who think it's the worst idea, because when we look at like the rates of education, a lot of Indigenous kids aren't getting through high school. Like, you're as likely to be incarcerated than you are to finish high school. So, like, in that scenario, if we don't fix anything but we put Indigenous languages into school, suddenly you could have all of Australia speaking and understanding Indigenous languages except for Indigenous Australians because they're all in jail, which is, like, crazy to think about. So I guess this big rant is saying, like, there is no, like, one easy solution. It's about just, like, connecting to community, to people who are of country, and asking for their guidance and wisdom around that. But I think just being a genuinely open-minded and having the intent, and also, like, active listening, like, where you're okay to, like, actually hear what people are telling you, is just, like, just being an open, good person. Like, that's the crazy thing, is it's, like, actually pretty simple when you really get down to it. But
I think we have one more question.
Hi everyone. Just kind of wanting, just on your kind of note as well, I guess, because I work in media as well, and I get a lot of quite nasty comments whenever I have to do kind of public work.
Sure.
I've been told to kill myself a bunch of times. I never do, so yay me.
Still here.
Yeah, still here, sucked in. No. I'm just kind of wondering, when, as a person of colour, do you find yourself having to be more resilient, and do you feel like there's a kind of cost to that? Because in my situation, like, I'm a target for certain kinds of abuse.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're a journalist, you get it anyway. But people are worried, and I'm generally not.
The most racist stuff, was that to me?
To all of you,
cool.
I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll lead off. And for me personally, the most racist stuff that I cop, and I cop a lot because, you know, One Nation supporters can find the SBS Facebook page, for example. You know, and they say all kinds of hectic shit,
Sorry,
right?
I just the fact that you're like, they can use a computer.
What's crazy is that they will, like, these people will like the page. It says like, but they don't like it. Do you know what I mean? They just follow it so they can say nasty shit. But the most racist stuff doesn't affect me because as much. The personal stuff, people telling me I'm not funny is what actually gets to me. People being like, you've got a tiny dick and you're good at maths or whatever. It's like, I don't care. Like, that's not about me. You hate, 6 billion? You hate 1.6 billion people in China. You know what I mean? Like, it's a diffusion of responsibility. Do you know what I mean? Like the person who's racist towards me doesn't actually hate me. They just hate all Chinese people. So it's actually, it feels like, this is such a nerdy maths answer, but it feels like less about me. You know what I mean? Whereas if someone's like, I don't like you, specifically Michael Hing, if someone's just like, I hate Asians, it's like, well, you hate all of us. It doesn't matter. Like, whatever. This isn't about you. This is about the rise of China, that you lost your job in the mines. Like, that's what this is about. You know, like, yeah. So the racist shit sucks, obviously, but it doesn't affect me personally. The stuff that does affect me personally more is the stuff where it's like, you know, talking to my family or tagging my sister and stuff. Like, that stuff, when it's affecting people who have not chosen to be in the public eye, who are close to me, that's the stuff that really is more dangerous. And that's the stuff that's like, luckily I work at a place where when that stuff does happen, we have like really good procedures in terms of like security and whatnot. So SBS is really, really good about that stuff. So the times I have got like proper serious stuff happen, I've got a support network that deals with it. Yeah.
Do you find that serious stuff happens more often because you're a person of colour?
Yes, but at SBS it's kind of equal because everyone's a person of colour. I mean, look, as a Chinese person, honestly, in the hierarchy of people who cop it, the Chinese people are like not as bad as, like, you know, the NITV people at SBS cop it heaps more. You know, I would, like, in the current climate, you know, my girlfriend's her family's Muslim. Like, they cop it so much worse. I can only imagine what other people get. So as a person of colour, yeah, but Chinese is pretty low on the scale of. I mean, in 5 years, probably it'll be higher. I expect. Our stock is not rising, is it? I mean, it is globally. I just mean that makes people afraid and they're angry about it. I don't know. I'm trying to buy shares in a futures market of race. This is fucked. I'm sorry. This is the most problematic thing. Someone else start talking, please.
I guess I did some stuff. Me and my best friend did some stuff with SBS as well, and it was a little bit tricky because it was around the time they did a series for it was like a slavery show. I can't even remember what it was called. They made us basically go on Vox Pop and ask people about slavery, which was very confronting for Australians to have me say, hey, what do you think about modern day slavery? It's like so uncomfortable. Something I probably might not have done with in hindsight, but it's fine. Social media is brutal. Like, you can cop some really, really nasty stuff. I've never been told to kill myself, so props for being able to deal with that. But we did put up a video. It was actually on cultural appropriation specifically, that we copped so much backlash for, like so much. And I'm not the type of, people are like, oh, just close your laptop. Like, I'm not the type of person that can do that. Like, I'm constantly refreshing it, being like, what have they said? Oh, that's really hurtful and mean. Like, it was awful. It was really, really hard. So, I don't know, turn off those notifications and try to put your phone down. Like, you are going to, I think inevitably you are going to cop it. There's racist people everywhere, but yeah, do you know what I mean? Living in Australia, you are going to cop it.
And I think, one thing I found really valuable was just understanding that the toxicness and the hatred isn't yours to deal with, because if it comes that actually is owned by the person who's delivering it, and it's not your burden to carry. It's not
so true.
And I guess that's why he said it was easier to cop the racist stuff. It's the more personal stuff that really hurts. Do you know what I mean?
Because that person has to walk around. They've got to be a racist all the time.
Yeah, that's their own issues that they have to deal with. It's like water off a duck's back. It's when people start taking personal digs at you. That is pretty rough. That's pretty rough.
I reckon we're actually going to have to wrap it up now, but thank you so much to our panellists. You can get a bit of a round of applause.
Oh, no, and thank you guys so much for coming to this. I realise you're at a music festival, so hearing 5 people go on about race may not be your idea. And some of you are probably coming down, so shout out to anyone whose serotonin is depleted and had me yell about killing myself for a while. I'm sorry.
So you can catch Ziggy tomorrow on the mix-up stage at 12:15, followed by Ebony on the same stage. And Michael, you'll be doing a couple of spots here tonight and tomorrow night.
Yeah, come by from 5 p.m. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for having us. This is so cool.
Yeah, thank you guys.